I really love the partnership that First Baptist Sudbury has with Kings Hill. Any chance Pastor Jay asked me to come and share with you guys? I'm like, 1, absolutely. 2, tough shoes to fill. But 3, I would be honored. And so thankfully, he said, hey, you can preach on anything. So I chose something that's more of a prayer for me. It's actually a word that we just added into the mission statement of our church, the word wholehearted. It's a prayer that I've been praying. God, would you make me a man that's wholehearted after you? A year ago, I made a concerted effort to really just study and go through the Psalms afresh. And I remember getting to Psalm 119, which is all about the word of God. It's the longest chapter in scripture. It has over 170 verses. In fact, the stanzas of that chapter line up with the Hebrew alphabet. It's really like an acrostic alphabet poem. But throughout this psalm, you get this repeated phrase in the psalm, which is this: my whole heart. Psalm 119:2. Blessed are those who keep his testimonies, who seek him with their whole heart. Psalm 119:10. With my whole heart I seek you. Let me not wander from your commandments. Psalm 119:34. Give me understanding that I may keep your law and observe it with my whole heart. Psalm 119:69. The insolent spear me with lies, but with my whole heart I keep your precepts. Their heart is unfeeling like fat, but I delight in your law. Psalm 119:145. With my whole heart I cry out, and you answer me, Lord. I just love that. It's an amazing phrase, my whole heart. What does that mean? Wholehearted means undivided. It means there are no split allegiances, no dividing loyalties, no rivaling affections. Wholehearted means that it's singular in its focus. It's not here, not there, not everywhere. It's set, it's fixed on an object. You're sold out for it. You give up anything for it. Another way to say it is you would be holding nothing back. So I wonder how you might fill in the blank this morning. I am wholehearted about fill in the blank. I wonder what you'd put there. I wonder how others would fill in that blank for you. For some, it's really easy to know what someone is wholehearted about, right? We just got done with the Olympics, right? During Michael Phelps's Olympic years, we would say he is wholehearted about swimming, right? For stay-at-home moms, which my wife is, we have 4 young girls, 6, 5, 3, and 1. Somewhere to say, what's she wholehearted about? She's wholehearted about raising her kids in ways that love Jesus. So one question to ask ourselves is this: like, am I wholehearted about the right thing? Or to even stretch it, am I wholehearted about anything? And how can you tell what you're wholehearted about? How can you discern what you love the most? When we talk about this at our churches, we kind of put before our church, we have a really young church, right? So we are probably averaging age-wise like late 20s. We're right in the center of Boston, right by the Prudential Center. And so we have a lot of college students, young adults. We don't have actually many families. And so kind of one way we challenge our students, young adults, to think about, are they wholehearted about Jesus, is we ask them the question, what's winning in your life? When given the choice between 2 competing things, which one wins? So a couple maybe of life illustrations. So you have a father who's a driven businessman. He has ambitions that often cause him to stay late at work. And this is a sustained pattern, right? Missing out on family dinners, missing out on bedtime routines. You could say, well, you know what? Career might be winning out over family. Or you have 2 people who are dating, both have plans for the future, but they're different plans. And so eventually it reaches a head because the plans they have are leading them to different places. Well, what's going to win, the plans or the person? This is how, at our church, how we often talk about following Jesus. Is Jesus winning with your life over all areas of life? So that this morning, we're going to take a look at Mark 14. So I would invite you to turn there with me. And we're going to get a picture, actually, of what I believe what pursuing Jesus wholeheartedly looks like, and a contrast, a picture of a heart that is totally captured by the world. We're going to see a real life illustration where Jesus is both winning and losing in the hearts of people that are close to him. So we're going to look at Mark 14. And as you turn there, it's worth mentioning that the first 10 chapters of Mark cover about 3 years of Jesus' ministry. The last few, right, include the final week of Jesus' life. So Mark slows way down. You got 10 chapters, kind of all 3 years of Jesus' ministry. The last few chapters, it's the week, the final week of Jesus' life on earth. So that means that each event that he records is really significant, like the one we're about to see. And in this text, we're going to be introduced to a woman who has this profound offering to Jesus. So we're going to examine her offering first. We're also going to see the angered response of the disciples, so we'll consider that second. And then finally, at the end, I want to draw out some applications for us as this story gives us. We're going to think about it in terms of the wholehearted mindset. All right, so let's look at Mark 14. We're going to read verses 1 through 11. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and how to kill him. For they said, "Not during the feast, for there will be an uproar among the people." And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. And there were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Then Judas, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priest in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad, and they promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. Okay. So just to kind of get the text underneath us, consider the scene of these verses. Mark notes that this occurrence is during the time of the Passover. This was an annual Jewish feast that included the slaughter of a Passover lamb. It foreshadowed Jesus, right? The Lamb of God who would take away the sins of the world, whose death at this point in the story is now imminent. So it's no coincidence that God has timed the upcoming death of Jesus during the time of the Passover. Now, pay attention to verse 3, because enters this woman while Jesus is reclining with some guests in the home of Simon the leper. Now, she's unnamed here. She's named in other accounts, but I think the reason that Mark doesn't name her in this account is because he's not trying to draw attention to her identity, but mainly to her action. We have much to learn from this unnamed woman. So look at what she does in verse 3. We just read it, just read it again. While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining, this is Jesus, at the table, a woman came in with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard. The text says very costly. And she broke the flask, poured it over his head. So here's what she does. She takes this very costly, right, alabaster flask of pure nard, and we're told that it was worth 300 denarii. You see that in verse 5. This would be equivalent to about a year's worth of wages. So those around her, when she does this, they think she is totally foolish. They think she's absolutely reckless. Mark goes so far as to record that they scolded her. And they say, you know what, this could have been given to the poor. What you've done in this moment is an absolute total waste. That's the word they use, wasted. So that's what they say. Look at what Jesus says in verses 6 through 8. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial." So Jesus here comes to the woman's defense and actually rebukes those that are responding to this woman with resentment. Like they're thinking to themselves, like, come on, like what you've done, that's like totally reckless. That like the least you could have done is given this to the poor. Like even if you didn't want to keep the profits for yourself, at least you could have given it away to benefit someone else. Don't just pour it over someone's head like that. And Jesus basically says in these two verses that we just read to the disciples, rebuking them, you have really underestimated my worth. You have underestimated, so he corrects them. You will always have the poor with you. Whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. Now, Jesus is not putting down the poor here when he mentions the poor, that they'll always be around. The Old Testament is filled with instructions to care for, show mercy to, provide for the poor. But the greatest commandment is not love your neighbor as yourself. The greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, those two are inseparable. We cannot love God by ignoring those that he's made in his image. But the woman saw Jesus as more than just a neighbor, as more than someone just made in God's image. She saw him as God. Like, she recognized his worth. And so she brings to him her best, her very best. And all of it now, this year's worth of wages, this pure nard, breaks over the alabaster flask. It all goes to him. And so here's what the disciples miss and what Simon misses, that the value of the gift should correspond to the honor of the guest. The value of the gift should correspond to the honor of the guest. So in the woman's eyes, Jesus is her treasure. Like, when we call Jesus Lord of Lords, that's true. And we call Jesus King of Kings, that's also true. But saving faith includes one more line. He is the prize of all prizes. He is the treasure of all treasures. Like, that's how the woman considered Jesus. So she gives him her very best. And so here's the big difference between the disciples and this woman, right? We're looking at the woman's offering here. The disciples, they look at the flask, they see it's broken, they see it poured over Jesus' head, and their attention is on the flask, the costly nard. And they see it broken, and they say, that was wasted. Now, the woman, on the other hand, sees Jesus. And she says, well, he's worthy. He's worthy. And he's worth all that I have. Now, you test this. Isn't it true that we are wholehearted about what we find most worthy? If someone values their career or their job as their highest aim in life, because from it they truly believe that they hope to gain influence and respect from their position, then here's what will happen. They will make whatever sacrifice they need to make to climb the corporate ladder in their profession. If that's what they think is most worthy, they'll be wholehearted about that. If someone values money higher than a relationship with God, then they're going to sacrifice the virtue of generosity, the obedience of faithful stewardship to keep that money. Because what you find most worthy is what you're wholehearted about. It's something you're not willing to compromise on. It's what you want to keep more than anything else. And for this woman, what she wants is time with Christ. She wants to please Christ, bless Christ. And because that's at the top of her list of what her heart most values, of what her heart finds most worthy, she doesn't care what she loses if it means gaining his presence. So that's the woman's offering. But there are other people mentioned here besides the woman. So we're going to take a look at them, right? We said we'd take a look at the woman's offering. Also, we want to take a look at the disciples, and there's actually a couple different parties here. In classic Markan style, the woman actually is sandwiched between two parties, okay? So you have the woman, right above her, you have the scribes, religious leaders, and then right below her, you have Judas, the betrayer. Now, if the woman shows us wholeheartedness towards God, then what you see in the scribes above her and what you see in Judas below her is a heart that actually is in love, not with Jesus, but the things of the world. The total opposite, total contrast of what you see in the woman. The scribes want to kill him. Judas wants to betray him. And both are actually rooted in the same reason. What's the reason? Well, we're not told explicitly in this passage in Mark, but we are told the reason in other gospel accounts. Consider what Jesus says of the Pharisees, say in Luke 16, 13, and 14. No servant can serve two masters, For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed Jesus. So money or God, you can only be devoted to one. You can only be wholehearted about one. And so the Pharisees hear what Jesus had to say about money, and their reaction is they're going to slander him and mock him for his teachings. Or consider the words of Matthew 23:25, again, Jesus addressing the Pharisees. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside you were full of greed and self-indulgence. All right, so when you think about the parties mentioned in Mark 14, you have the woman, we've looked at her, right? But above her, you have the scribes. And basically what Jesus is saying is that these scribes, these religious leaders, their heart is filled with greed. Their hearts are focused on what they can gain from the world. So they're not caring about eternal things, they're caring about temporal things. So that's the scribes. Their hearts are full of the love of money. Their basic impulse is, I want more for me. Don't know where I said moi, maybe it's an inspiration from the Olympics in France, okay? So the reason why the Pharisees hate Jesus so much, yes, because of his claims to deity, but sometimes that can be a cover-up. Also because he's calling them to abandon the love of money, the love of the world. They don't want to. All right, so we've considered the religious leaders' attitudes towards Jesus in the party, right, above the woman, the scribes. Now consider Judas, the one mentioned below the woman in Mark 14. He's the one disciple mentioned by name in our passage. And he really becomes, doesn't he, like the poster child of where money leads, the love of money leads, I should say. Like throughout Jesus' ministry, Judas is the one, he is the treasurer. He's the one that carries the money bags around. And actually, if you turn to John chapter 12, we actually learn more details about this very account. All right, so this is what John writes about this account. But Judas, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used it to help himself to what was put into it. That detail is significant. The gospel of John helps us understand actually the heart of Judas in Mark 14. Like Judas on one side of his mouth is speaking as if he so much cares about charity, that he cares about the poor. That's what he says. This was wasted. It could have been given to the poor. But actually, he's a thief driven by money. And he portrays Jesus by selling him out. So I want us to understand here the contrast between the scribes in verses 1 and 2, the disciples' response, in particular Judas, and the woman's offering. Because the scribes and Judas, they sell out Jesus for their own selfish gain. They don't count Jesus as their treasure. They count the world as their treasure. Maybe a way to say it like this. If you're talking about what is winning, it's not Jesus, it's the world. The world has won. And remember, Jesus said you could only be sold out for one thing. And when we're about seeking to get as much as we can in this life, when our hope is fixed on reputation gain, financial gain, relational gain, then here's what's happening. Self is at the center. And instead of loving God with all of our hearts, actually what we're doing is we're stepping into the very shoes that Judas walked in. Now Mark, though, he has shown us that this woman, she doesn't sell out Jesus for her gain. She's actually sold out for Jesus because she has given all that she has. Because she's considered Jesus her treasure. She's considered Jesus most worthy. What she does with this alabaster flask reminds me of Matthew 13:44, that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, He covered it up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has, so that he can buy that field. He's not being sold out. He's selling everything to gain the field because that's where the treasure's found. That's what's going on in the heart of this woman. In my prayer for King Hill, and shared this message with them, and my prayer for First Baptist Sudbury is that we would resemble the bold faith that we see with this woman. Like what I don't want for us is to be Judas. Like he's with Jesus, but in reality, he has 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I think that this passage, it's a warning for us, right? It kind of begs the question, like how might we become a Judas? Well, we become Judas when we look at our career and our dreams and our ambitions, and we say, you know what? That's worthy. And we sell out Jesus and we give our everything to achieving goals that honestly God's never set for our life. Or we become a Judas when we're in relationships that we know aren't healthy or right or God-honoring, and we say, this relationship is worthy. And we sell out Jesus in the process. And we actually forfeit the very relationship with him and with others that he wants for us. So we become a Judas when we start to be so enamored and drawn to the American dream, like the nice house, the great 401k. And slowly but surely what's happening in our hearts is that comfort, not the mission of God, but comfort, luxury, and ease, they're becoming the things that we prize and want the most. And we say, that path, that's the worthy path. And we abandon the missional, self-denying calling of God in our lives that's placed on every Christian. And that's the test for us. Will the world catch our eyes? Will we be drawn to it over Jesus? Will Jesus win, or will the world win? You see, if we choose the world, then at that moment, when we see Jesus face to face in all of his majesty and all of his glory, and we give an account to God with our lives, here's what's going to happen. The tables will have ironically turned, and we will hear the word wasted, not from the mouths of disciples, but from the mouth of God. To choose the world is a wasted life. It's the wasted path. And so I'm here just to stir us up. Honestly, I pray, Lord, let me preach this to myself today, to stir us up by way of reminder that the infinite riches of God's grace expressed in the person of Jesus, the forgiveness of sins that he alone provides by his death and resurrection, the fact that he has gained victory over sin, Satan, and death. I'm just here to stir us up by way of reminder over these massive, glorious realities that he is the only one to which our hearts should express with gratefulness, worthy. He's the worthy one. Nothing from the world, but Jesus alone. Now, I told you that we would look first at the woman's offering, and then to the reaction of the disciples, especially Judas's, but then I'd circle back and provide some application. So I'd love to do that now if you would allow me the time. We'll call this the wholehearted mindset. And I read a passage like this, it's really more of a prayer. God, would you allow my heart and my mind to be shaped and informed in such a way that I would be wholehearted towards you? That I could say the same things that I read about in Psalm 119. With my whole heart, I seek you. God, would you give me that kind of mindset? How can we move towards Jesus winning in our lives, in all areas of our lives? What would the wholehearted mindset be? I think what we see in the life of this woman, especially this action of this woman, we see three things. First, the wholehearted mindset says this: Jesus, I value you over people's approval. You are worth more to me than the thoughts of others. when this woman walks into this dinner party, okay, we have to understand she is breaking some serious cultural taboos. Like, this is not a woman's place in this time and age. And we're not even sure she was invited, probably not. And even if she was, this woman is late. So apparently she's like interrupting this gathering, and it's not welcomed. In fact, the word that's being used here to describe the response of those in attendance would be indignation. Like, that's what we see in verse 4. They were indignant. The word literally means like the flaming of a horse's nostrils. Like, so in their eyes, she's foolish for what she's doing, and they're really upset that she's in this home. There's a lesson to be learned here, right? Because can we just say that when we live in total surrender to Jesus, like, your approval rating will probably not be all that high. Nominal Christians will not understand you. Culture will hate you. You will be called dumb. You will be called crazy and foolish. And that's probably the best of it. It only escalates from there. And you will likely lose out. If you were to put your faith forward, you will likely lose out on promotions, on friendships, on experiences, on pleasures, on praise from men. And I'm reminded of what Paul actually says in Galatians 1:10. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God, or am I trying to please man? If I'm trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Like we shouldn't be naive to the fact that following Jesus, there's going to be a serious cost. Like, for many, we're extremely blessed, but for many, the allegiance to Jesus means they could possibly or have lost those closest to them or have lost their own lives. And so it begs the question, is it worth it? And for the woman, it was. Here's why. She didn't care if the disciples called her stupid or ignorant or foolish, which they did, called her foolish. As long as it pleased the one she was bringing the offering to. And so does it. Look at verse 6. But Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. You see, when you live for the beautiful from Jesus' mouth, you can face opposition with boldness because you don't live for their approval. It doesn't bother you what other people think. Jesus, what do you say? Is this self-abandonment, self-denying, radical, generous life, like, is that pleasing to you? Because if it is, I don't care if anyone else disagrees with it. So the wholehearted mindset says, Jesus, I value you over what others think. The second, the wholehearted mindset says this, Jesus, I value you over my possessions. Your purposes are more important to me than my comfort. Look at verse 8 and 9 again. This is Jesus speaking of the woman, and he says, she has done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly, I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Like, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this woman was uniquely set up for this moment to anoint Jesus. Like, she alone had the means for this very specific contribution. Jesus had already predicted his death in previous chapters, and here she is, the one woman who has the ability to anoint his body before his future burial. And here's what happens. She doesn't withhold it. She takes what she has and she uses it in the service of the Lord. And I think to myself, and I put myself in her shoes, like what would I have done? Because it's so easy for us to have this like imaginary line. Like, we don't talk about it out loud, okay? That would be foolish. But we have this imaginary line that says, Jesus, I will follow you up to this point. But please don't ask me to step over that line. I will go serve my neighbor across the street, but please don't ask me to go to the nations. We have a line. We have this imaginary that says, Jesus, like you were worth it up to this point. Now, this woman doesn't have a line. Everything that's at her disposal, she offers it up to Jesus. Like she's erased the line. And if you think about it, there's really no better way to spend a year's worth of wages than anointing the Lord's body for burial. like the best way for us to spend our sweat, our schedule, our savings, our speech is to see the kingdom of God go forth. Like ultimately, there is no better way to invest your time, talent, and treasure than when it's going to the worship of God. But to get to that point, you have to hold in your heart that the purposes of God are more important than our pleasures and comfort. And so can you say with conviction this morning, can you say with sincerity this morning, God, all that I have is yours? That's a scary thing for me, to be able to say that with my 4 girls. But I want to get there. God, as long as I have you, I have all that I need. There is no place in my heart that I hide. There is no treasure of mine that I hoard. There is no plan for my life that I hold. I lay it all down. I withhold nothing. There is no reservations. It's all on the table. That's what you see with this woman who brings a year's worth of wages to anoint Jesus' body for burial. Thirdly, and finally, the wholehearted mindset says this: Jesus, I value you over every earthly thing. I look to you to fulfill everything my heart desires. It's worth begging the question, how do you get to a place where you can hand over a year's worth of wages? Don't know what you make, don't want to know what you make, but imagine you've saved up for a year. Would you be willing to come into First Baptist Sudbury and say, the Lord has put it on my heart. Use this for the expansion of God's kingdom? Like, how do you get to that kind of place? How do we get to a place where the Lord has our heart in such a way, where we trust God in such a way that we're willing to put on the table the very means by which we survive? Maybe to put it a different way, what kind of experience with Jesus would you need to have not just the mental understanding, but the heart understanding that Jesus is worth everything, and now your taste for money and worldly things is totally gone? Like, what would need to happen in your heart? What kind of experience would you need to have with Jesus? I think this woman experiences it. Up to this point, we haven't talked about the name of the woman because it's not given in Mark. It is given in other accounts. Her name is Mary, Mary of Bethany. She had 2 siblings that we know of. One is Martha, and the other is Lazarus. Mary actually just had a recent experience with Jesus following, but before what we see in this account. You might remember this story. It's in John 11. Her brother dies. And then he's raised back to life. Like, you see your brother die. And you see Jesus walk into the scene 4 days later, and with just a few words, you see him come out of a tomb. Would that be unforgettable? When you meet someone like this woman does, who has the power to raise back someone from the dead, who has the power to forgive sin, who has the power to defeat death, then here's what's not happening. You're no longer following money. You were following Jesus. And Jesus, I just saw you raise my brother back to life. Listen, I don't know how you're going to take care of me, but I know I don't need this. as long as I have you. So she got to the place where she experienced the worthiness of Jesus. And then she wholeheartedly gave what she could to bless him. Why would she try to hold on to what doesn't give her true life and forfeit the one who does? The wholehearted mindset echoes the words of Psalm 73, 25 and 26. My heart and my flesh may fail, but God, you are the strength of my heart and my portion forever. The wholehearted mindset says, Jesus, you are not going to be a part of my life. Jesus, you are not going to be an important part of my life. Jesus, you will be my life. You will be everything to me. I want nothing else than to experience more of you, and you can do whatever you want. And you can have whatever you want so that you can use me to help others experience you like I have. That's the wholehearted mindset. And so I pray that Jesus would win your heart, that you would look at the cross, his love for you, his resurrection, his power over the world, and the wonderful promise that he has an inheritance waiting for you, that you would look at all of that, and he would win your heart.